Okay, so some people have asked me for advice on reading music. I think reading music is probably the second most useful skill you can possess as a musician, generally. The first most useful skill being able to play well by ear. Reading is not a replacement for playing well by ear, but it certainly is obviously a very useful skill for getting paid employment as a musician, but also for being able to access as wide a range of materials as you can. I would say that I'm fluent in notation. I would say I'm not necessarily the world's best sight reader known to man, although I have done reading gigs on occasion. And I just want to sort of relate really the advice that I found helpful over the years, as well as some bits and pieces which I've kind of picked up myself. Reading music is not just one skill, it's a whole slew of different skills. So some things that you practice might seem very sort of rigorous and very kind of strict, but other things might just actually be a matter of just acclimatizing yourself to it and just doing it, okay? If all these ideas that I'm throwing at you seem to be quite diverse and maybe not that connected necessarily, that's okay, because so's the whole art of reading music. You have to read. You have to read a lot. Try and read every day if you can. Wean yourself off the use of tablature. I don't mean to have a go at tablature. I think it's an ancient form of notation for guitar and other plucked stringed instruments. It has its place. I find it very useful for communicating stuff which specifically needs to be communicated from the point of view of the guitar. But it's also a bit of a crutch. So try and get yourself off the tab as quickly as possible. I know it's going to be painful because it's going to be hard to read music at first, but the more you read music, the better you're gonna be. And also, add to that, the fact that you should be learning music by ear as much as possible as well. Those two things, if you force yourself to do them every day, you will inevitably improve. Okay, it's just going to happen. It's kind of a kid's book, but if you want to get started with sight reading, I would recommend Guitar Basics, which is a very good book that I use with all of my, basically all of my sort of beginning child students. But it's a lot of fun, and there's a diversity of style. All the examples can be played with a pick, and there's a backing track, which is important for reasons I'll explain later. And I would say really the most important thing you should be able to do on day one is be able to spot a B. Now, on the treble clef, a B looks like a blob right in the middle of the lines. If you can spot that, then you're off to a good start, because then you just need to work out the other notes by, are they on the line? Are they in the gap? Which gap or line are they on? But the B gives you a really good, quick and easy visual reference. So, that's decoding style, the decoding half of learning to read music. Being able to recognize a B right off the bat is kind of where I would start most of my child students off. And then if you work through the book, you're going to find that you're going to get more and more of a repertoire of notes. And that's kind of the conventional way of doing it. By the end of this book, you will be able to play all the notes, all the natural notes in open position. You'll start to understand sharps and flats as well. And there's another book after that. And, I think they're just really good. There's nothing revolutionary about them, nothing particularly new. But they work, they do the job, and the backing tracks are lots of fun. So I definitely recommend that if you're a total beginner and learn to spot a B, okay? The decoding side of it is one thing, but I think if you're anything like me, I sort of started off with classical lessons and was able to read my notes in open position. But this bit of the guitar was Here Be Dragons. So I would suggest taking something very simple like, E, D, C. Is that the right note? Yeah. I don't have perfect pitch on this. E, D, C, D, E, E, E. E, D, C, D, E, E, E. Find different places to play it. E, D, C, D, E, E, E. E, D, C, D, E, E, E. So that's one way of doing it. And you can map the neck in positions. That's probably the most conventional way of doing it. So, for instance, I can start in first position or open position. So I can go G, A, B, C, D, C, B, A, G, like that. And then I can work my way up. I would normally move on to fifth position after that. Okay, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, B, A, G, F, E, B, C, like that, right? So you've got that little bit of the neck learned. And I wouldn't do a full position necessarily. I'd just kind of keep it to small chunks, maybe 1 octave chunks of a scale. The thing down here was just half an octave, wasn't it? If I was doing a full scale, it'd be C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So you could just learn that much. and maybe do that for a week and really get to know that little semi-position. And the way I would do it is I'd just do it the way I have by saying the notes out loud. So, okay, well, now we've done that. Well, what about this bit of the neck, right? Okay, and we want to find that bit of the neck, find out what the notes are there. So maybe I might play in this position. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Maybe move up there rather than go that way. So I've got like do. I've divided the neck into 3 parts, and I've basically got all of the notes now on the top 4 strings, although there's some ones down there as well. That's a really good start. Now, you want to make sure that you've really consolidated your sense of fretboard mapping in each position. So one thing you could do is you could say the names of the notes while you play the scale, as I have been doing. So for instance, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, C, B, A, G, F, E, B, C, for instance, okay? As slowly or as fast as you can, but as slowly as you need to, and as fast as feels natural. I could do the same thing in thirds, which is a good exercise. C, E, D, F, E, G, F, A, and then G, B, A, C. Now you want to do this up here as well. C, so it's C, E, D, F, E, G, F, A, G, B, A, C. Now, you might not know your scale in thirds, in that case, I'm just going up the scale, but I'm skipping one out each time and then coming back one. Okay? So it's like leapfrog, just going up like that. You can use other intervals if you want, but in general, I think the thirds will give you a really good start. The other thing that can help is actually playing what we call musical words, which are words you can make up out of the 7 notes of the musical alphabet, being A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So for instance, a good one is cabbage. If I can play cabbage in a position, I know that I have a reasonable understanding of that position. So for instance, C, A, B, B, G. Can I spell cabbage? C, A, B, B, A, and then G, E. That's cabbage there, right? I mean, the note positions were fine, I just didn't know how to spell cabbage. Okay, that's a separate problem. Baggage, dead, face, cage. Face would be F-A-C-E, right? F-A-C-E. Sounds like Mozart, okay? So you just learn, that will get you all the natural notes on the instrument, and then it's a matter of just mapping through the key signatures. So for instance, if I'm going sharpwards, I would think about adding in the F sharp, so I've got G major. So in this position, it'll be C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, which is Lydian mode, so I might start wanting to add the G in, which is back here. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, like that, right? So extending the position a little bit, okay? And it's quite easy to hear major scales, so you can learn them sort of step by step just by ear. And I think that's quite a good way of doing it. I'm not necessarily a fan of people just like going to books and working through that. I think I've always learned it better myself by working it out myself, but a lot of people find the William Leavitt books really, really good. I'm just saying, they're kind of classic texts. I never used them myself, but I would be remiss not to mention them here. So that will give you a basic kind of understanding of the neck from 0 to 12 in terms of where the natural notes are. I mean, obviously you need to do this with the bottom 3 strings as well, right? You extend across and then you can learn all of them. So that's great. However, one big mental block that a lot of my students seem to have is to be able to go from fingering to thinking that's an A. So if I play this A with this finger, or this finger, or this finger, or this finger, or my nose, or whatever, it's still an A, okay? There's no difference. That note hasn't changed. So you want to think of that note as being bling, it lights up on the fretboard, it's an A, okay? It's an A, it's an A, okay, right? So you want to be able to see it, okay? And that means that when you are able to play these positions seamlessly, that you are then able to develop the skill to play in what I call the in-between positions. So if this is, 9th position up here, and this is 5th position here, then in-between positions would be things like 3rd position. So it's like, okay, well, 3rd position is a bit of 5th position and a bit of open position, isn't it? A bit of 1st position. So this D, you've got to play with a different finger. It's the same note, though. It's 1, 2, 3 up on the B string. There we go. And then the C, we borrow from 5th position. And the E and the F as well, right? So playing the open string as we normally would. Okay. Okay, so up here it's the same thing. So I might start, where am I going to start for my C? Well, my C might be here, right? But then I might be borrowing the D from the 5th position, E from the 9th position, and then F from the 9th position as well, G from the 5th position, and so on, right? And this might seem like a slightly awkward way to understand it, but the idea is that eventually you paper over the cracks, so you just have a continuous understanding of where the notes are. So if I play the natural notes on the guitar, I know that I'm going to be able to go G, F, E, D, C, and then B, A, G, F, E on one string or whatever, and I know what all of those notes are eventually, right? That's the process of a few years probably building up that knowledge, okay? And you can do it while you're learning to read. You don't have to learn this before you start to read. It's just that the more that you know the neck, the more options you'll have for playing phrases when they come along. So another thing that's really good is transcribing. So transcribing, I think there's a bit of vagueness about what exactly transcription or transcribing means. The use of the sort of bit of the word that is scribe kind of suggests some kind of writing. In fact, actually, a lot of jazz people who learn solos or study solos actually never write them down. But if you want to practice your notation skills, writing phrases down is fantastic practice. Writing down anything, and writing down the melody of a standard, just in simple note values, for instance, if you're not quite so advanced to be able to, write down Charlie Parker solos or whatever, is fantastic, because that will give you that relationship, that two-way relationship with notation, and it will become less intimidating to you and more friendly seeming, perhaps a little bit more familiar, a little bit less forbidding, So I really recommend that. You don't have to write down loads of stuff. As I say, it's just something you want to practice and keep warm every day, and the more you do it, the happier you're going to get with it. So this is really important. We've got to learn to spot familiar shapes. And on a basic guitar level, this means that when you look at a chart, you can see that this right away is a basic C major chord, right? Yeah, you can see right away that this, for instance, is standard drop 2 voicing of a major 7th, C major 7th, right? And then obviously the more complicated stuff you get, the more hard it's going to be, but maybe if you can have a look at a chart and understand that this, for instance, is A minor pentatonic, and this, for instance, is C major scale. And get used to recognizing these whole shapes, and these shapes can also be rhythmic. For instance, ba-da-da is a common phrase. In samba it's called the fork. The more accustomed you get to recognizing little cells and bits, for want of a better word, motifs, I don't know, whatever your cellular bits in a piece of music, the faster you're going to be able to read, because then you won't be reading at the level of, say, letters. Like everybody starts off reading by going apple, apple, and then later on we just look at the word and we know that it's apple, and we just think of an apple in our heads and we know how to say the word, right? So when you get better at music, you start to read music on the word level, the sentence level, and eventually even on the paragraph or whole page level for some advanced readers, okay? So that's really where we want to be getting. And I think just, obviously that's going to be very difficult when you start off. But if you work through that Guitar Basics book, by a few pages in, you're going to start recognizing scales and things in the melodies. It's very well put together like that. So you're going to go, oh, it's a scale going up and down. And if you read intelligently, if you read not just at the note level, but at the level of kind of like, here's a familiar object that I recognize, then you'll be able to read much faster and much more fluently, right? It's not always possible. Not everything is familiar. But this kind of leads on to the next sort of topic, which is that you should practice reading the music that you want to play. And obviously the music that you play most often is easiest to read. So on classical guitar, for instance, I'm much better at reading Baroque music than I am at reading modern music, because I can improvise a little bit of Baroque music and I understand how the harmonies work. If I see this chord, I know what it is right away, whereas if I see this kind of a chord, like, I don't know, and that's much harder for me to read, right? I recognise one, I don't recognise the other. In the same way, if I see that lick written down, I know what it is, so I played it so many times, or that sort of stuff. Standard little fragments of bebop language that you see all the time. You listen to them, you hear them, you work them out, you write them down, then you see them in the Omnibook, and you're like, oh, that's what that is, right? Now, in sort of pop, rock, jazz, big band music, that kind of thing, we have a little bit of a problematic situation compared to, say, reading classical guitar music, although classical guitar music certainly has its own issues. But we often have quite a mixed range of information coming at us. So a single like big band chart might contain written pictures, written riffs and things, and little parts that are meant to play with the horns or something like that. It might also include just like slashes with chords written over the top where we're expected to comp or take a solo, improvise, basically. And then in other places you might see like little rhythmic figures that are indicated, So it's actually quite a lot of information. Like I was looking at a trombone pad, and it's really funny after a big band session once, and was thinking like, yeah, you've only got to absorb one kind of information. As a guitarist, you have to be able to understand a lot of different information coming at you very quickly. And because of that, it's good to read actual jazz charts if you can get hold of them. I understand there's an app for the WDR Big Band, for instance, and you can sort of see charts sometimes. The reason why I can't really say, oh, go here to go and look at some big band charts is because arrangers would ask you to pay money for their parts. That's what allows them to go on arranging, right? But if you can get hold of any parts for anything, practice reading that. Again, this is the sort of stuff that you'll get really good at. I mean, I haven't done it myself, but I know loads of people who have. It's the sort of thing you'll get really good at if you spend any time in kind of like mainstream entertainment, for instance, the kind of things where you're reading in pit bands for shows, or most frequently playing in bands on for cruise liners. Is a really, really common area of work, or at least it was before the pandemic for musicians, and a lot of musicians kind of cut their teeth and did their apprenticeships in those situations. Pun not intended. Apologies for that. Okay, another little bit of advice I got, which I thought was really good: rhythm first. So the thing is that if you're playing music and you're in a band and you play a wrong rhythm, it's going to stand out more than if you play the right rhythm but maybe some dodgy notes. Okay, and certainly you stand a much better chance of not getting lost and everything else. So, I would advise learning to read rhythm first. I've done another video, which I'll link to, which talks about how to read jazz rhythms. Jazz rhythms are quite tricky, very syncopated compared to perhaps classical rhythms, for instance. But that's really important. Really take note of the rhythm and try and maybe when you're practicing your sight reading, maybe practice the rhythm away from your instrument first. And that can really give you a big helping hand when you actually try to read the thing through. Okay. Lastly, sight reading. So sight reading and reading aren't quite the same thing. One can be a pretty good reader, one can understand notation, but not necessarily be that good a sight reader. I think the reason why I sort of mention that is because I think there's a difference in mentality. So if you're a sight reader, your main aim is to get through the piece. That's your absolute first priority. Don't stop, don't drop a beat, don't get lost, carry on to the end, and you've basically done it, right? That's the most important thing. If you only get one thing right, it's that. And obviously you want to get other things right, but that's the process. Once you can do that, then you can practice your sight reading anyway. Okay, if you can't do that, then you can't, right? So that's number one. Perhaps if you're more of a kind of less of a sight reader, you might read through a piece and then sort of stop to puzzle out difficult bits or whatever. That's not really a possibility when you're sight reading. When you're sight reading, you have to kind of make a sketch of the piece. And that's actually a form of improvisation. So, for instance, you might simplify like a little chordal passage down to a couple of notes that you can read, or you might, say, I can't play those voicings, but I'll sort of busk other voicings, or you might just play the top line. You might see a load of notes and maybe drop in and out of some of the eighth note lines when they become too difficult, but you don't lose your place, you carry on, or you just approximate the pictures and play the rhythms that are written, okay? And the only way I think to learn to do that well is by, doing it, okay? Sight reading is really a skill which is cultivated through experiential learning, through actually being in the pits, and having to do it. You can practice it at home, obviously. One way of doing it, which I quite enjoy, is that there's some string quartet performances up with the scores. So I quite like reading along with different parts of the string quartet. Usually the violins, because I'm not very good at reading alto clef. Things like that are good, although they always turn the page far too late. Sight readers will tend to turn the page a little bit early, so they have a heads up on what's coming up down the pike, you know. That's another skill you learn. So really, to sight read, I think you have to learn really on the job. But you know, you're not going to be able to do it unless you have a basic foundation of, you know, how to read notes on your instrument. And then once you've got that, then, you know, go out there and give it a go, and try and find some people where it's okay to mess up at first before you take your first West End gig, is my advice. Anyway, I hope you find that helpful. There's a lot to talk about with this area, and I plan to make a few more videos on it, because I think it's obviously a really big blind spot, famous blind spot for musicians. And hopefully you'll find some of those hints helpful. Thanks for watching.